Welcome to Inspiring Business with your host, Mark Bullock, who is the co-founder of videosocials.net and of videointerviewpodcast.com. In every episode, Mark interviews business and organizational thought leaders who share their stories of how they inspire others by making a difference. You can find this show on videosocials.net and YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and almost any podcast platform of your choosing.
Welcome, and I am delighted today because my guest is Philip Hecht, and Phil's a friend and client. Phil is the CEO of Above Par Advisors, which is a New York-based strategy and change management consultancy, helping the Fortune 2000 and healthcare sectors break through the status quo and remain relevant and competitive in the markets they choose to operate. It's wonderful to have you today, Phil. How are you?
I'm well, Mark. Thank you. That's a mouthful, but thank you very much.
Yeah, I think all of us have a bit of a mouthful, and being concise is as we get older and have a lot of experience and a lot of work with a lot of different clients, it becomes even more challenging because
you know my joke. Brevity is not my strong suit, but I'll try hard.
Well, we're all kind of in practice of that, right? So,
touche.
So Phil, I always like to start with, what's your story? You're in really kind of a specialized market. You have a specialized, a very specific client base that you serve. But how did that come about? What's your story? Your life story in 5 minutes or less. How's that?
This one I'll do in less than that, but. I've been in technology and consulting for over 30 years. I was an executive at AT&T in their outsourcing and business services group, never handled their core services. I ran their foreign government and diplomatic services business, so spent some time around the world, dealt with 100 countries, the UN, and that group. So, that market presents some very interesting challenges, which allowed me clearly to focus on the solution side. The early stages of global outsourcing, but that's where we were. From that, I became a partner at Accenture in a small stint as a chief marketing officer of a medical technologies company. Same thing, taking on the challenge of productizing some intellectual property and bringing that to market. So it's always been a solution-driven environment for me, advocacy on behalf of the client. And after I left Accenture about 10 years ago, I went from 200,000 people globally and 4,000 partners to 10 of us, but we have a strong core team that works with the C-suite. That's why the market sector that you referred to, healthcare sector and global Fortune 2000, there's a special need in C-suite alignment. These are organizations that are pulled in many different directions by their key objectives and their own markets and their own teams and organizations. And sometimes, frankly, they self-inflict wounds, and in a way, that is what we focus on. We tackle challenges to the organization that they cannot seem to resolve themselves, nor, frankly, should it be within their core competency to resolve it. So, we didn't actually start this way. It's a great question as a business owner. We really launched out of Superstorm Sandy 10 years ago. I also had a background in resiliency planning, emergency preparedness as a sector, which is very technology-based but very strategic. And we offered that up to organizations in the area affected by Sandy to support them in a way that their own organizations, in a way, it failed them. So, and then from that grew the rest of our disciplines, which we drew on, again, 30 years of experience. So that's where we are, today. We're thrilled, to become Again, advocates on behalf of the client, but trusted advisors to the C-suite.
I find it fascinating sometimes the overlaps in our professional lives and whatnot. I mean, you and I serve entirely different markets in entirely different ways. But you mentioned, redundancy or backup, failover, the kind of work. And in a previous life, a little more than 10 years ago, I was doing global network infrastructure architecture for major financial institutions, United Nations, et cetera, and that was one of the projects actually that we worked on, and really looking at it from bridging that gap between the technology and the business strategy, and pulling all that together was really kind of my place, because the tech, it's all high tech, but it's at the same token, the tech has to meet the needs and the objectives of what organizations are doing, and be ready for and prepared for major catastrophic, if not transformational, market shifts, caused by, and you had mentioned that Above Par Advisors, was born out of, Hurricane Sandy. And, as the whole world knows, we have had a massive pandemic. And that is, again, a paradigm changer. And I think that from what I know of you, and I've seen you record many videos and known you for a while now, I think that you guys really, the value that you bring to the table is really helping organizations to deal with both the changes that are thrust upon them and the changes that they need to make, whether it be in response to some catastrophic type of event or major global shift, or whether it's because the status quo isn't working anymore. But in this post-pandemic world, remote workers, having remote staff, it's everything has to have massively impacted the healthcare industry. And are your clients struggling, with that, and how can you help them in that arena?
So thank you. That's a great question. So I think it's safe to say that the hybrid working model is a near permanent model. I read an article just yesterday that even New York City, where we're based, Billionaires Row on 57th Street is half empty. So if they're not buying apartments, you can imagine the space that's still available in commercial real estate. There are literally whole buildings that are, virtually empty. Even our offices had to move because our building literally was shut down as 85% of the tenants left during the pandemic. So you can see the challenges that it brings forth. Now, I'm working from my home office, and we largely ourselves have gone, to a virtual environment because, first of all, we're client focused, and we should be either with our clients or behind the scenes, working on their behalf. That is not necessarily a model that fits everybody. Many organizations can, but there are also organizations that can't. The challenge now is, how do you reconcile that? And how do organizations which have a cultural desire, almost an employee desire, pushing up against the key objectives of the organization, to work, in fact, remotely or in a hybrid model? Well, you can't treat patients remotely. You can't learn healthcare education without, physically sitting in a desk or being in a healthcare or hospital environment. So there is a balance that needs to be struck. I think there are probably some ham-handed responses that I think the rank and file find objectionable. You've seen this. I'll just pick a name, not that I'm picking on someone, but you saw this with the demands of some of the Wall Street firms or frankly, Elon Musk, come back to work or you don't have a job. That's probably not sitting well, with the employee base. And um, we help our organizations think through what strategies ought to really be deployed effectively in order to keep their key objectives in mind. And one of those challenges, frankly, is adoption and communication. And, for all their worth and for all their value and for all the markets they serve, some organizations just don't communicate internally particularly well. So rather than making the remote worker and the hybrid model part of the solution, they've made it the enemy. And that's where you're getting most of the pushback from. So I think this is a strategy that has to be embraced. It is not the easiest one. It has also happened, talk about a perfect storm. It is also happening at the same time as there are some employee retention and policy issues which are evolving. And these two, are coalescing at the same time. We had a major media client who just told us that they're also eliminating traditional employee personal time off vacation as a function of employment. Usually that model is you work 2 years, you get 2 weeks off. That model is being thrown out the window. So not only is it an agreement now between worker and manager on how much time you take off as long as you get your work done, look at the complexity that's adding to managing a remote worker in a hybrid environment. So this is challenging organizations in ways that they really never anticipated. And you can't leave it up to HR. You can't leave it up to the legal department. This really needs to be a cultural adoption in the organization. And, you need to think it through. You need to match it up to the key objectives of the organization, but you have to make hybrid work. Again, in the healthcare sector, it's a different issue. You've got to provide support for the employee base without stretching them as thin as they've been stretched through the pandemic. That's a similar challenge, but a different dynamic. And frankly, in the healthcare sector, one of the greatest challenges right now is high turnover. People are simply burned out because of the pandemic, and you've got to find and figure out a way how to plug the gaps. So they aren't as stretched, as they were clearly in 20 and 21. So,
well, and it wasn't really kind of on my agenda, but what you're bringing up is something that in my 30 plus years of consulting and coaching and advising, et cetera, both through technology and marketing, et cetera. What I think I see as much as anything is, especially as for larger organizations, recognizing and dealing with significant shifts in the marketplace is something that's really best done with some outside guidance. Because if you're trying to, your world, it as it was, but as it's shifting, you may not be able, you're going to be blindsided sooner or later. You can't have your eye on everything, and you can't see every little trend. You can't see, and whether this be employee surveys, whether this be, conversations with HR people, whether it be, it's having that objective outside eye of people that are highly experienced in that industry that can help you see what you can't. We all have our blinders and stuff. So I really think that as far as I'm concerned, the need for what it is that you guys provide is really at the pinnacle right now, because as you say, we've seen such massive market shifts, such massive labor shifts in this last couple of years that it's like if you're just knee-jerk reaction, oh no, we're not going to do remote. As you say, well, you might just be shooting yourself in the foot, because you're going to take people that might otherwise be, incredibly valuable in their roles that you're providing, and by not at least having the conversation about how you can accommodate them, and what would work for both the organization as well as the organization's objectives, as well as that person on staff. I really think that it's incredibly important and a valuable exercise to have, again, you guys come in as an outside objective, blinders off. You're not sucked into the culture that's been created over years and perhaps decades. You're able to look at it more objectively, and so along that lines, I think another really big issue that your clients must be dealing with is that they've got to be trying to save money. They've got to be looking at how are they going to cut cost, and now with all these other changes that are going on, that's the hardest time to try to cut your overhead, et cetera. And I understand too that they're all being challenged, by the loss of elective, a loss of revenues from elective surgeries, things like that. How do you help them navigate this? It's like the candle's being burned at both ends.
Well, first of all, thanks for the plug. So listening, that's great news. Yes, outside advice is, look. I remember when I was at AT&T, and the chief marketing officer, who was one of the brightest people that I had met, one of the top 5 executives in the company. I remember having dinner with her one evening downtown Manhattan, and I was a little bit early, and so was she. And I walked in, and she basically put up her hand and said, "I'll be with you in a few minutes. I'm on with my coach." And that has always stuck with me, that someone in such a senior leadership position and had such responsibility and such scope with funds, et cetera, still had a coach. And that has always stayed with me, in the nearly 20 years since that night. And I think that is an underlying principle that is anathema to some organizations, works with others, and then highly embraced by some. And I think there's a lot of truth in your commentary. Sometimes organizations may, in fact, even have the solutions buried somewhere within it, but it can't work its way to the top. The cream somehow doesn't get to the top. And having an outside voice does make sense. And having an objective point of view makes a lot of sense. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had 200,000 people at Accenture around the world, right? There's value there. So you're right, and thank you. From the standpoint of saving money, we're in an interesting time. You mentioned elective procedures, so I'll talk about healthcare for a second. Healthcare has never been, for the last generation, it has not been a particularly profitable industry, but that's a lot to do with the model that works. It can be, and it could be, but it's a bad business model. And unfortunately, as the population ages, here's an example, and you may have heard me do this in one of my videos. We did some work for a hospital upstate New York. They had pushed the $1 billion revenue mark, and then realized that they started to slide backwards. And the reason they were sliding backwards was the population they served simply was aging, and it was not being replaced by a viable younger population. So what happens? You go from private insurance to Medicare or Medicaid. And the difference between that is a knee replacement might be $50,000 in revenue on a private insurance basis, and $16,000 in Medicare. That's an unsustainable model if your fixed cost base doesn't change. So they're challenged in that regard. And they're also challenged by the fact that profitable revenue comes from elective procedures, and because of the pandemic, that census, as it's referred to, simply has not returned to pre-pandemic levels. So there's a margin issue as well. Now, are there ways to fix that? And this is where the commercial sector and the healthcare sector, overlap. And that's frankly by instituting a cost management discipline in the organization. And this is one of our practices, right? Cost management is extremely different than simply lowering cost or cutting cost. And therein lies,
Right.
in our opinion, right, what the solution is. And what I mean by that is can you culturally embed in an organization a philosophy in being efficient? It just so happens I wrote a blog post on this just this week. We have a new client who shared with me pre-pandemic, healthcare client, by the way, pre-pandemic. They were growing fast. They were in acquisition mode. They were flush with cash, doing very well. The CFO said, hey, guys, good time for us to look at cost centers. How can we become leaner and more efficient? And the answer and the pushback was, why? Why bother? We have the money. We've done it this way before. There's really no need. And what do you think happened? Post-pandemic, there isn't enough money. The turnover is high, and now you're facing a significant problem, victim to your own success. So the difference there is not just to slash jobs or cut the price of laundry, prescription drugs or pencils or chicken breast for the commissary, right? I mean, commodity price cutting isn't a way to implement cost management as a discipline. This has to be an analytic. Our name, people say, where the heck did you get your name from? Well, our middle name, if you will, PAR, stands for Performance Analytics and Resiliency. And these are three core philosophies that we approach our work with. And analytics is really at the core of everything that we do. And we think it's at the core of implementing cost management. And cost management is the C-suite embracing an idea that you have to become a leaner, and that does not mean cut people. It means a leaner operating model and a more efficient organization. And therefore, you're not in this perpetual cycle of, okay, the economy's good, let's hire a lot of people. The economy's bad, let's fire a lot of people.
Right.
Okay, let's beat up the vendor because we need nickels, when the economy's bad. Okay, we'll splurge when the economy's good. This is a perpetual roller coaster that, over the long run is not sustainable. So the cost management discipline is one. Is it hard to swallow? Yeah, it is hard to swallow. But, I often say it may be simple, but not easy. And that is true. So our help is helping the organization do a deep analytic, a deep assessment of where they are. As you said, we want to keep them relevant in the markets they choose to compete in. And you need to do that by sustained cost management, not cutting costs. So long-winded, but it really is a philosophy, and you need to.
And I think that one way or the other, small or large, tens of thousands of employees or three, if as again these global shifts are happening, and it's almost like tectonic shifts are happening, that I think you outlined it beautifully in the fact that, pre-pandemic, flush with cash, we're used to, money solves a lot of problems, right? and now there's not as much necessarily money to solve those problems. And so, there's a mindset shift that, if I was to try to surmise everything that you just said into a sentence, would be to be thinking and acting and being lean and efficient. And that requires a cultural shift all the way down.
That's right.
So and I think you're really effective at communicating that, and I think it may be valuable for people to know how we know each other, because again, we're completely different markets, completely different things that we do, but we have respect for each other and what we do, and we met through our service called Video Socials, which is videosocials.net, and we get together professionals. Mostly service professionals, might be attorneys, might be consultants, might be CPAs, might be executive coaches, etc. And we, in a social environment, in a video conference environment, get our videos done. We record our video blog posts and our videos for our websites and our videos for our email communications with our clients, etc. But we do it in a community where we're learning from each other. We're helping each other see from different perspectives, because when you're sitting there trying to talk to an inanimate object called a camera, you don't know how that's landing. You don't know what the audience is actually seeing and engaging. And so we act as each other's surrogate audience. We act as each other's ability to give feedback. And anybody that's interested in doing video, I encourage you to come as a guest to Video Socials, videosocials.net / or just videosocials.net, and then click on the guest tab at the top of the screen. And there's no cost or obligation. But Phil, you've been involved for a while. Why did you join, and what are you getting out of it? How are you utilizing it?
So it's a great question. Like you said, we may be in a unique niche, and in a way, so are you. I think Video Socials is a joining place between what some would say is a BNI and a networking group, right? Because it's kind of an overlap between those two. One, how did I get here? Through a dear friend and a colleague who was a member prior to me. Two, I clearly was sequestered during the early days of the pandemic. And as a result of that, we needed to hold on, like our own clients, we needed to hold on to course and speed. And when we were introduced to Video Socials, we started to build a community. Now, I don't know if all of your groups operate the same way, but our group, which is maybe 8 or 9 strong, 10 strong, in the last close to 3 years, we have come to know each other and know each other's businesses, and we become de facto coaches and support for each other. And whatever message we are recording, the group now can stand on their own merits in their feedback and commentary, and there's great insight. It's almost like an unpaid consulting, or coaching, to each of the members, right? Plus it's also excellent to have a community in what remains largely a remote environment for us. We may be working locally, but now you have a myriad group of people from different geographic locations, yet we're all on the same page at the same time.
Right.
I'm getting 2 clear things out of it besides the community. One, we're testing the waters in how we use video, which is unique. I mean, no one trolls the internet and decides to hire a strategy consultant. It's just, it's like, oh, today let me go look for a strategy consultant. That's not where we get our business. We get a lot of business from referral, and then when we speak to people, they'll come and find out who we are post facto. So they'll go to our website, or our LinkedIn, and connect to some of our videos. So that's the first place. So our voice is heard after an introduction. And then second, we're starting to use it in outbound marketing campaigns. We're attaching it to, structured messages, and we're attaching it even in emails after our business development folks have reached out to potential clients.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a request to send some material, and why not have a 45-second video from the CEO? So, it's a great sense of community, and it's a great marketing measure for us.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the plug as well, and additionally, I think it just goes to show, because we always start off every meeting by saying that Video Socials is a safe place to practice and experiment, and you've certainly been willing to practice and to experiment, and videos can be used in dozens of different ways within the marketing envelope. It's not just video blogs. It's not just video for websites. It's client communications. It's training. It's et cetera, et cetera. So everybody could use some practice. Everybody could use some experimenting. So again, I encourage everyone to come as a guest, and we'd love to meet you. Before I get into the last question that I have for you, Phil, you did mention the website. It's aboveparadvisors.com. You're on LinkedIn as Philip Hecht. Mm-hmm. You're on YouTube as Above Par Advisors 5641. And don't worry, folks, you don't have to remember all this, because the links will be associated with however you're viewing or listening to this podcast. YouTube or Apple iTunes, whatever it is, all of them will have all of these links there for you to be able to look up Phil. And Phil, I guess to kind of bring it full circle is, you see it. I think that many times the staff and employees see it, that shifts need to happen, that rethinking old ways of doing things needs to be done. Strategies need to be developed. But what is the palette of the C-suite for seeing the value in, embracing, and willing to do the work for the kind of changes that are required?
It's a great question. The best way for me to answer that is, I'll go back to something I said a while ago. Organizations can become victims to their own success. We actually authored an article on this called The Rigidity Trap, and I'm happy to send it to anyone who'd like to read it through. And basically, the premise is that if an organization, and particularly the larger they are, has done something successfully for some period of time, they dig their heels in and they continue to do the same exact thing. And they can actually get rather militant and defensive about it, especially if it relates to certain sectors of their business where jobs and people and careers are both at stake and exposed, or in the light. So that, however, does not change the dynamic that the market is changing dynamically, and in some markets more rapidly than others. So the organization faces a challenge. You either become victims to your own success, or the place and time to look at change in the organization is, in fact, when things are going well, not terrible or not poor. It's often either too late or very radical when you're at that point. So leadership, some might have a bitter pill to swallow, but if you recognize that the trap is in fact that, and you can't always keep doing it. It goes back to the client I mentioned earlier. It's great when money is flush, but now when money isn't flush, now you're first going to start trying to cut, and now when turnover is high and you need to rely on your team, you're trying to impose stricter measures on the same organization. So it's a double whammy for the team. So are some organizations resistant to change? Almost every organization is resistant to change. You've heard me talk about this many times.
Yeah.
Because change is simple, but it's not easy. So, advocacy at the C-suite, and conveying a message that the C-suite is not directing the organization, but in fact is in the boat with the organization in need of change, is the singular most effective way to initiate change. It is not an imposition. It is a measure of success and future planning. It's a future forward view. And again, the best way we believe organizations can change is to have logical communications, adoption strategies, do it while you're on top of your game, okay? Not when you're in emergency status. And history, at least in commerce, will show that those who have invested, right, when they're in the better of circumstances, will survive the downturns far more effectively than those that are in fact rigid, because they crack. Rigidity cracks an organization. And the C-suite who recognizes, hey, we need some change here, and embraces it, communicates it, gets in the boat with the team, and then helps with the adoption, is probably the most effective way to implement it.
Phil, awesome. I mean, we could go on all day, but I really want to thank you for coming on today. I really want to acknowledge you for the kind of impact that you're having and trying to have, through. It's not just change management; it's cultural realignment sometimes, and there is. You've created quite a bit of content that's free and available, through your YouTube channel, through your website, etc. And again, the links will be tied in with this. And I encourage everyone that if you're challenged by, or you're seeing that, if you see something that's resonates with you with what Phil's been talking about today, there's certainly there's no charge and no risk in going and watching a couple of Phil's YouTube videos or reading a couple of his blog posts on his website. So,
sure.
Phil, you had mentioned before we got started that you had somebody in mind that might that I don't already know that might be a good guest for the Inspiring Business.
Yeah, you have to be selective with your time. There's a gentleman's name happens to be Doug Kennedy, and he may not know I'm mentioning his name here, but he's with an organization that I also have great respect for. There, the San Francisco-based area that provides fractional CFO and C-suite leadership, which is very valuable, especially for middle market companies in the $5 to $50 million range or even more. I was referred to somebody, not a particular fit for us. It's not the kind of work that we do.
Mm-hmm.
He leads the family practice, which means he helps structure family businesses for the challenges that they face, family-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was glad to speak to the referral, and then I referred him to Doug and CFOs to go, and sure enough, they signed that contract. So there is value, like you say, in a small sense of community, not, at least for us, not networking for its own sake, and not volume. It's targeted, and those are the people that I'm happy to refer for you. So I'll send Doug your way.
Thank you. Well, I look forward to meeting Doug, and it sounds like an interesting model, and look forward to having a conversation with him. But
sure.
Phil, thank you, and delighted to have you on today. Delighted to have you involved in Video Socials. everyone in it, and you're certainly an example of that, contributes to that community, and we all learn from each other, and you're certainly as much of a contribution as anyone there, and really do appreciate your participation and your counsel, and as we've been growing it. So stay tuned, everybody. There'll be a little bit of information at the end of the screen how you can subscribe and see more of these types of videos of really quality individuals that are out to make a difference in the world. And thanks again for joining us on Inspiring Business. Have a great day, everyone.
You've been listening to Inspiring Business with your host, Mark Bullock. Your positive comments, likes, and most importantly, your sharing of this show with others is greatly appreciated. Don't forget to subscribe to the Inspiring Business Podcast on whatever platform you prefer. You can catch prior episodes on videosocials.net and on